When you're looking at this data, what is Lululemon showing? Is it anything in terms of confidence, or are investors still, or I guess consumers still excited about Lululemon's products?
Yeah, they really are. When we look at Lululemon purchase intent mentions at LikeFolio, which is people talking about buying the clothing that the company makes, we see relatively little impact from this coronavirus scare. We see pretty flat year over year, which I think, it could be disappointing to investors who are used to skyrocketing growth from Lululemon. But I do think that this is a company that's done very well through this, despite having, a really solid retail footprint. They're also building up their digital capabilities in a big way. And really the key for us is looking at, how happy people are with Lululemon products. And I think there's a flight to quality for a lot of consumers right now. If you're going to buy something, you want to make sure that it's high quality. You're not buying as much as you used to probably in terms of shopping. And so when they do buy something, they buy something that they know they really like. And so you can see on this chart, the percentage of people, the number of people that are talking about Lululemon products being of high or superior quality is growing at a pretty good clip. And so I think the company's got a nice solid fan base to come back to when it's time. And so this is one of those companies, like Kevin's been talking about, building out a shopping list. And, maybe you've been shopping over the last, 3 days ago rather than today was probably the better move. But I think Lulu is one of those companies that's set to really do nicely when things come back to normal because they have such an enthusiastic and loyal fan base.
Andy, I just want to make a statement before we go any further that Alex Coffey, Andy Swan, and Kevin Hinks talking about Lululemon is our strongest. Let's face it, this is our strongest representation. There's no three guys that should be talking Lululemon more than us three. That being said, the $1 million question in Lululemon is, did it get hurt? Did it participate in this? Because the stock certainly has. It went from basically 260 to, below 130 before it's now recovered, but it's still $60 off its high, Andy. I mean, these are still big numbers that Lululemon has sold off. So is it going to be affected like all other retail? Because let's face it, some of these retail firms that we see in this environment may not be able to withstand the storm that this coronavirus has thrown on the economy. Lululemon, possibly a completely different story there.
Yeah, it is. And I think when you talk about the stock price, it's pretty much impossible to say, whether it's fairly valued at 200 when it's been at 260 and 130 within a couple of month period. I don't think any of us are going to be able to hazard a guess on that. I do think that the company is well prepared. It kind of reminds me of Nike in some ways in terms of the way that people think about this company, the way that the company has built itself to start going towards the direct-to-consumer digital model like Nike did. I think it may be a similar earnings story to what Nike had. In fact, if you look at the chart here, LikeFolio data showing Lululemon has superior numbers in terms of consumer happiness with their product compared to Nike. So this is one of the best of breed products in the world. Consumers really love it. The company is on solid footing. Is it worth 200? Is it worth 150? Is it worth 250? I really can't say. I don't think that the market can say. I think anyone that thinks they can say is probably full of it. But I do know that Lululemon's core customer base is very loyal, very happy with the product, and that's a pretty good spot to be when things return back to normal.
Yeah, Andy, I love the point about consumer happiness. I think that in this space almost represents a perception of quality, not necessarily if it is high quality or not, but that perception of a product being high quality is almost more important than the actual delivery on it. And when you look at something like Lululemon, historically, it's been perceived as higher quality. And I know that it does have a higher price point that it carries, but I wouldn't say that it's considered a luxury brand by any means. So it's able to carry that higher price point because of its perception of quality, even though it's still not necessarily a high-end brand. So, Andy, do you think that's important, that it isn't going to be at such a high price point that it's out of the reach of the consumer who's, maybe facing a little bit of a pullback in spending given what's going on in the macro environment? And then real quick, Kevin, also, if you want to pull up the company profile on the platform just to illustrate Andy's other point, which is this is a company that's been founded on selling its products directly to its consumer. It has almost no, exposure to using these third-party companies like a Nike uses a Foot Locker. The stores are Lululemon stores. The website is Lululemon's website. And so they are doing all of their, marketing and selling directly from the company itself. And I think that's really important in an environment where companies are looking to cut costs as much as maintain business going forward. But Andy, am I interpreting that information correctly in terms of what you're saying with the happiness?
Yeah, it's exactly, you're interpreting it exactly correctly. I don't think that Lululemon is as dependent upon the Walmarts of the world or Targets of the world being open for business. I think they have a really loyal consumer base, and they know who their customers are through some of their prior outreach programs. And so they can generate sales directly to those people. They don't rely on people walking past an end cap in a third-party retailer, which I think is really critical at this at this juncture. And so I think that during this crisis, Lululemon is positioned to do as well as any clothing retailer can do. I think that after this crisis, they're in a position to do much better than others because of that loyal fan base and of the perception of quality that they carry with them going forward.
And Kevin, I want to pull you back into this conversation as well, in case you have any comments. Obviously, Andy pointed out how difficult it is in terms of valuing a company that's had such an extraordinary range over just a small amount of time. Obviously, it's one that investors have really been fond of over the last, several months, but leading up to, of course, the coronavirus and COVID-19 pandemic that has since turned into an economic crisis as well. But, Lululemon's already rallied significantly off those lows, about 50% off those lows, really. And I don't know if you have further questions for Andy or just comments on, what information we have to focus on here when there's so much to unpack. I'd also, probably point out that, some of these companies are pulling guidance from their earnings outlooks. I wouldn't be surprised to hear something similar from Lulu, as they're just not going to be fully certain in how this is going to all play out for their business as well.
Yeah, I do have some comments, and my comment on Lululemon is they are a testimonial to the fact that Americans, the U.S. consumer, will still and always has gravitated towards the highest quality and their willingness to pay more for the highest quality. I think that Lululemon has succeeded where Under Armour started to succeed and then lost their way. Under Armour, when they started in the apparel business, was that high quality workout gear. And somehow they got supplanted and lost their direction and went more middle of the road and discount. And I think it's cost them dearly. And Lululemon has clearly stepped into that space as the high-end, high-quality athletic retailer.
Yeah, and Andy, I want to get your kind of comments on that as well. And then also, I would say that they've also kind of put on a master class in terms of how to grow a company effectively from a branding standpoint. They've almost done nothing outside of sort of partnerships with local yoga studios and stuff like that. But they don't sponsor pro athletes, to my knowledge. But what they have done is they started as athleisure primarily for women here in North America. Slowly have started to grow that internationally, but really expanded into menswear. And when you're looking at growth components for something like Lululemon, is that the strongest growth? Is it in the menswear, and is it abroad?
Yeah, it's in the menswear for sure. It's also in their projections were for a lot of growth in China, so it'll be very interesting to see what commentary they have on that. I think you're right. No one's going to believe any guidance that they put out if they do put any out, so they might as well pull it. I think it's a great opportunity for companies to be a little bit more honest with how much they know about the future. and maybe that can change for a lot of companies going forward. But I do think, when we're talking about Lululemon, Kevin's makes a great point. I mean, this company built itself zip code by zip code across the United States. They didn't go out and buy big banners in Times Square with big famous people on the billboard. What they did was they went to key influencers at the community level, and those folks are going to help see them through this difficult time. There are still, these yoga instructors locally are still connecting with their client base. They're not having them into the studio, but they're still connecting with them on a regular basis. They're pushing the retail products that they do have so that they can generate some revenue. So I think that Lululemon is in a prime position to do okay through all of this. I'm not saying that they're blowing the doors off, but compared to other retailers, other clothing manufacturers, I think they're in a pretty good spot. And it's one of those companies that, like Kevin said, I think we should all kind of admire the job that they've done over the last, really since their founding. It's been an exceptional story, and we should applaud that.
I know, absolutely. And then, Andy, last quick question here. If you had to make a trade, are you leaning a direction here? Are you neutral, looking to be a seller or buyer of volatility? And then from an investing standpoint, is it too hard to bet against this company, which we've talked about for I don't know how many quarters in a row that it seems they just can continue to deliver?
From an earnings perspective, I think the risk going into Friday for pretty much the entire market is probably to the downside after 2 days of massive gains. And so I think that's going to be the dominant story. I'm not sure that Lulu will even be able to, impact its own earnings nearly as much as the market moves impacting it. So if I had to bet anything, I'd probably bet a little lower, but I'd like to see them beat and go higher. I think the expected move is something like 10%. So you got to be careful. There's a lot going on in this market.